Rain hammered relentlessly against the diner's windows, the neon open 24 hours sign flickering like a heartbeat struggling to hold on. Inside, the air was thick with the mingling scents of burnt coffee and grease, a sanctuary for the weary and the forgotten. Amelia sat in her usual corner booth, her fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug. The steam rose, brushing her face with fleeting warmth. Her dark curls framed eyes that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, too many sacrifices made for her 8-year-old son, Leo, who was asleep at home under a pile of thrifted blankets. The city never slept, but Amelia often wished it would, if only to give her a moment to breathe. Across the street, Elijah leaned against the cold brick of the shuttered bookstore, his blanket doing little to shield him from the storm. His face, weathered by years of hardship, bore a quiet dignity, though his hollow cheeks and weary eyes betrayed the constant battle for survival. The rain had soaked through his sneakers, the soles worn thin from miles walked without a destination. He had long stopped expecting kindness from strangers, the world had taught him that invisibility was safer. Yet tonight, something in the air felt different, as though the storm itself carried a secret waiting to be unraveled. The sleek black car pulled up, its presence incongruous amidst the cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. The door opened, and a man stepped out, his every movement precise, calculated. He was tall, his tailored suit clinging to his lean frame, and his polished shoes glistened with rain. His face, illuminated by the glow of his smartphone, was instantly recognizable. Elon Musk. A name synonymous with ambition, innovation, and controversy. He moved with the confidence of someone who had reshaped the world in his image, yet his eyes, sharp and searching, seemed to be looking for something he had yet to find. Elijah stiffened as Musk approached, clutching his blanket tighter. He had seen wealthy men before, passing by in their expensive cars, their gazes sliding over him as though he were part of the scenery. But this man stopped. His presence was magnetic, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the rain seemed to hush, as if the city itself were holding its breath. "If I gave you $1 billion, Musk said, his voice cutting through the storm like a blade, what would you do to change the world?" The question hung in the air, impossibly large, impossibly absurd. Elijah's lips parted, but no words came. He stared up at Musk, his mind racing to grasp the enormity of what had just been asked. Inside the diner, Amelia froze mid-sip, her pulse quickening. She couldn't hear the words, but the tension in Musk's posture, the disbelief etched on Elijah's face, told her that something monumental was unfolding. The storm raged on, but the three of them, Amelia, Elijah, and Musk, were caught in a moment that felt suspended in time. None of them could have known it then, but this night, this question, would set their lives on a collision course with destiny. The city, with its towering skyscrapers and shadowed alleys, would become the stage for a story of transformation, of power and vulnerability, of the invisible finding their voice. And it all began with a question that demanded an answer. The story unfolds in the sprawling, fractured world of Etheris, a realm suspended between the heavens and the void. Etheris is a land of floating islands, connected by ancient, crumbling bridges and shimmering portals. The skies are a kaleidoscope of shifting colors, and the air hums with the faint resonance of forgotten magic. Centuries ago, a cataclysm shattered the planet, leaving these islands adrift and isolating their inhabitants. Each island now harbors its own unique ecosystem, ranging from lush, bioluminescent jungles to barren, windswept deserts. The remnants of a once unified civilization are scattered across the land, with ruins of towering spires and intricate machinery hinting at a lost golden age. The people of Etheris have adapted to their fragmented world, relying on airships and winged creatures to traverse the skies. The protagonist, Kale, is a young scavenger from the island of Vyrn, a desolate wasteland dominated by jagged cliffs and constant storms. Kale is resourceful and fiercely independent, having grown up salvaging relics from the ruins to trade for food and supplies. His piercing green eyes and a jagged scar across his left cheek tell the story of a hard life, marked by countless scrapes with danger. Kale's initial motivation is survival, but deep down, he harbors a yearning to uncover the truth about the cataclysm that shattered Etheris, a mystery tied to the strange, glowing pendant left to him by his late mother. The pendant occasionally pulses with an otherworldly light, hinting at its connection to the lost magic of the ancients. Joining Kale on his journey is Lyra, a skilled mechanic and pilot from the island of Solara, known for its thriving airship ports and bustling trade hubs. Lyra is bold and quick-witted, with a knack for turning scraps into ingenious inventions. Her fiery red hair and grease-streaked hands are a testament to her tireless work in the airship docks. Lyra and Kale share a complicated history. They were childhood friends until a bitter argument drove them apart. When Kale's pendant begins emitting stronger signals, he reluctantly turns to Lyra for help, knowing her expertise with ancient technology might hold the key to unlocking its secrets. Though their reunion is tense, their shared curiosity and determination gradually rekindle their bond. The third key figure is Arinder, a mysterious wanderer who appears to be from an island no one has ever heard of. Clad in flowing, iridescent robes and wielding a staff that crackles with dormant energy, Arinder possesses knowledge of the ancient world that far surpasses anyone else in Etheris. His silver hair and glowing blue eyes give him an otherworldly presence, and his cryptic warnings about an impending disaster suggest he knows more about the pendant and the cataclysm than he lets on. Arinder's motivations are unclear. While he offers guidance to Kale and Lyra, his true intentions remain shrouded in mystery. As the trio embarks on their journey, the environment becomes increasingly perilous. They must navigate treacherous air currents, evade sky pirates, and uncover the secrets hidden within the ruins of the ancients. Each character brings their unique skills and perspectives to the group, but tensions rise as old wounds resurface and Arinder's enigmatic behavior sows seeds of doubt. Together, they must confront not only the challenges of Etheris but also the truths about themselves and their place in a fractured world on the brink of further collapse. Rain hammered against the diner's windows as Amelia's breath caught, her coffee forgotten. Outside, Elijah's trembling hands tightened on his soaked blanket, his mind racing. Musk's question wasn't just words, it was a fracture in reality, a challenge to fate. Amelia's pulse quickened. She felt it too. This wasn't chance. It was the start of something seismic, a collision of lives destined to unravel secrets. In the quiet, sunlit town of Meadowridge, three unlikely companions found themselves bound by a shared ambition. Clara, a fiercely independent botanist, dreamed of establishing a community garden to revitalize the neglected park in the heart of town. Lucas, a struggling artist, sought to create a mural that captured the spirit of Meadowridge's history, but he lacked the resources and support to bring his vision to life. Finally, there was Elena, a reserved librarian with a passion for storytelling, who longed to host a festival celebrating the town's forgotten legends and folklore. Though their goals seemed separate, a chance encounter at the park's crumbling fountain revealed a common thread. Each needed the park to become a vibrant gathering space for their dreams to take root. Their collaboration began with cautious optimism, but obstacles quickly surfaced. Clara's plans for the garden were met with resistance from the town council, which deemed the project too costly and unnecessary. Lucas struggled to gain permits for his mural, facing skepticism from residents who doubted his ability to capture the town's essence. Meanwhile, Elena's attempts to gather support for her festival were hindered by her own shyness and the community's indifference to its own heritage. Frustration simmered as each realized their individual efforts were insufficient to overcome these barriers. Yet, it was Lucas who first proposed a solution. If they combined their visions into a single initiative, they might stand a better chance of rallying the town behind them. As they worked together, their dynamic evolved in unexpected ways. Clara's practicality clashed with Lucas's free-spirited approach, leading to frequent debates over priorities. Yet, their mutual respect deepened as they began to see the value in each other's perspectives. Elena, initially hesitant to assert herself, found her voice as she mediated their disagreements, her quiet determination earning their admiration. the trio's shared struggles forged a bond that extended beyond their project, and they began to uncover hidden facets of one another. Clara revealed a vulnerable side, admitting her drive stemmed from a desire to honor her late grandmother, who had once tended a garden in the same park. Lucas confided his fear of failure, rooted in years of rejection as an artist. Elena, in turn, shared her longing to connect with others, having spent much of her life retreating into books. Subplots emerged as their efforts gained momentum. Clara discovered a mysterious journal buried beneath an old oak tree, its pages filled with sketches and notes about the park's history. Intrigued, she enlisted Elena's help to decipher its contents, uncovering clues that hinted at a forgotten time capsule buried nearby. Lucas, meanwhile, found himself drawn to a young boy named Sam, whose fascination with art reminded him of his own childhood. Teaching Sam to paint became a source of inspiration for Lucas, reigniting his passion for his craft. As these threads intertwined, the trio's shared mission began to resonate with the townspeople, who slowly came forward with stories, resources, and offers of help. Despite their progress, the road ahead remained uncertain. The town council demanded a formal proposal, complete with a detailed budget and timeline, leaving the trio scrambling to meet the deadline. Doubts crept in as they faced mounting pressure, but their growing camaraderie and the small victories they had achieved bolstered their resolve. Together, they began to realize that their project was about more than transforming the park, it was about transforming themselves and the community they called home. The morning began like any other in the quiet town of Ashridge. The sun filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting dappled light onto the cobblestone streets. Residents moved about their routines, shopkeepers opened their doors, children rushed to school, and the faint aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery on Main Street. For Emma Carter, a young journalist working at the local newspaper, it was another uneventful day. She sipped her coffee absent-mindedly, scanning the headlines for anything worth investigating. The town had been peaceful for years, almost too peaceful, and Emma longed for a story that could finally push her career forward. But as she leaned back in her chair, her phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. The text was from an unknown number, containing only a set of coordinates and a cryptic message: "You need to see this before it's too late." At first, Emma dismissed it as a prank, but curiosity gnawed at her. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, a place shrouded in rumors and superstitions. The factory had been closed for decades after a mysterious fire claimed several lives, and no one dared to go near it since. Emma hesitated, torn between her instincts as a journalist and the unease creeping up her spine. Ultimately, her thirst for a story won out. She grabbed her camera and notebook, deciding to investigate during her lunch break. When she arrived at the factory, the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. The building loomed like a forgotten relic, its windows shattered and walls covered in creeping ivy. As Emma stepped inside, the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavernous space. Dust motes floated in the dim light, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. She wandered cautiously, snapping photos of the crumbling machinery and graffiti-covered walls. But just as she was about to leave, a faint noise caught her attention, a rhythmic tapping, almost like Morse code, coming from deeper within the factory. Her pulse quickened as she followed the sound, her footsteps crunching on debris-strewn floors. What she found stopped her cold. In the center of the room was a makeshift workstation, complete with maps, photographs, and documents pinned to a corkboard. Strings connected various points on the map, forming a web of connections that made no immediate sense. Among the papers was a list of names, many of which Emma recognized as prominent figures in town. At the bottom of the list was her own name, circled in red. Before she could process the implications, a sudden noise behind her made her spin around. A figure in a dark hoodie stood silhouetted against the faint light streaming through a broken window. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, their voice low and measured. Emma's heart raced as adrenaline surged through her veins. She stumbled backward, clutching her camera tightly. The figure didn't move, but their presence was enough to send a clear message. She had uncovered something she wasn't meant to see. Without another word, Emma turned and bolted out of the factory, her mind reeling. Whatever she had stumbled upon was bigger than she could have imagined, and it was clear that someone, or something, was willing to go to great lengths to keep it hidden. For Emma, there was no turning back now. The quiet life she had known was over, and the story she had been waiting for had finally found her. The rain showed no signs of letting up, its relentless rhythm a soundtrack to the unfolding moment outside the diner. Amelia's fingers tightened around her mug as she watched, transfixed. The scene felt surreal, like a fragment of a dream she couldn't quite place. She glanced around the diner, half expecting someone else to notice, but the few patrons inside were lost in their own worlds, an elderly man nursing a bowl of soup, a waitress absently wiping down the counter, a couple arguing in hushed tones at a corner booth. It was as if the world outside the glass was a parallel reality, one only she could see. Elijah's voice, hoarse from nights spent in the cold, finally broke the silence. $1 billion? His gaze flickered to the car, then back to Musk, searching for the catch. Why me? He wasn't sure if the man before him was serious or if this was some cruel joke, another reminder of how far removed he was from the lives of the powerful and privileged. Musk tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Why not you? He slipped his phone into his pocket, the glow disappearing as he stepped closer. The world doesn't change because of the obvious choices. It changes because of the unexpected ones. His words were calm, almost clinical, but there was an undercurrent of challenge in them, as if daring Elijah to rise to the occasion. Inside the diner, the door jingled as it opened, a gust of cold air sweeping in along with a young woman in a soaked hoodie. She carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, her movements quick and purposeful. She scanned the room before settling into a booth near the window, her eyes darting toward the scene outside. Amelia recognized her as Harper, a regular who often came in late at night, always scribbling in a battered notebook. Tonight, though, Harper seemed distracted, her pen idle as she watched Musk and Elijah. There was a spark of curiosity in her gaze, the kind that hinted at a story waiting to be told. Amelia's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating on the table. She glanced at the screen, a message from her landlord, another reminder that rent was overdue. Her stomach tightened, the weight of her reality crashing back in. Yet, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the window. Something about the interaction outside felt magnetic, as if it were pulling her into its orbit. She wondered if Elijah would take Musk's question seriously, if he'd dare to imagine a world where $1 billion could be his to wield. Meanwhile, across the street, a shadow lingered in the doorway of a boarded-up pawnshop. A man in a weathered trench coat watched the scene unfold, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He lit a cigarette with a practiced flick of his wrist, the brief flare of the lighter illuminating sharp, calculating eyes. He'd been following Musk's movements for weeks, though this encounter with Elijah was unexpected. He exhaled a plume of smoke, his mind already working through the implications. Whatever was happening here, he intended to be a part of it. Back in the diner, Harper finally picked up her pen, her hand moving swiftly across the page. Amelia leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass as she whispered to herself, "What would I do?" The question wasn't meant for anyone, but it lingered in the air, heavy with possibility. The rain intensified, hammering against the diner's windows with a ferocity that seemed almost personal. Amelia's fingers tightened around the mug as she leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. She couldn't hear the words exchanged between the billionaire and the man on the street, but the tension in their postures spoke volumes. Elijah's shoulders, hunched in perpetual defeat, now seemed to tremble under the weight of Musk's question. The billionaire's presence was a disruption, a sharp edge cutting into the fabric of this forgotten corner of the city. Inside, the diner's usual hum of clinking dishes and murmured conversations had stilled. Even the waitress, a tired woman with frizzy hair and smudged eyeliner, paused mid-step, her gaze flicking between the scene outside and the lone customer at the counter. Amelia caught her reflection in the window, a woman worn thin by life, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Yet, despite herself, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed in years: hope. It was dangerous, she knew, but it stirred in her chest like a restless bird. Elijah finally spoke, his voice too soft to carry through the glass, but his body language betrayed him. He gestured wildly, the blanket slipping from his shoulders, his soaked shirt clinging to his gaunt frame. Musk remained still, his expression impassive, but his phone now dangled forgotten in his hand. Whatever Elijah was saying, it was raw, urgent, and Amelia couldn't look away. She wondered what she would say if asked the same question. $1 billion? The thought was absurd, almost laughable. But as she watched Elijah, she realized the question wasn't about the money, it was about the possibility of being seen, of being asked to matter. The door to the diner swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and the scent of rain. A man in a leather jacket entered, shaking water from his hair. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Amelia. It was Jack, her ex-husband, a man who had walked out on her and their daughter years ago. His sudden appearance was as jarring as the billionaire's question outside. Amelia stiffened, her grip on the mug so tight she feared it might shatter. Jack approached, his face a mask of contrition, but she wasn't ready for whatever he had come to say. Meanwhile, outside, the dynamic between Musk and Elijah shifted. The billionaire reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek business card, which he handed to the homeless man. Elijah stared at it, his expression a storm of disbelief and guarded hope. Musk said something else, a final word that made Elijah's knees buckle slightly. He caught himself on the lamppost, clutching the card as if it were a lifeline. Musk turned on his heel and strode back to his car, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the street. Amelia's heart raced as she watched Elijah sink to the ground, the card still clutched in his hand. Jack sat down across from her, his presence an unwelcome intrusion. "Amelia," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I need to talk to you. About Emma. About us." Her stomach churned. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside her. As the black car pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the rain, Elijah looked up, his gaze meeting Amelia's through the diner window. In that moment, their lives felt inexplicably tethered, like two threads in a tapestry being woven by unseen hands. The stakes had shifted, the world tilting on its axis. And Amelia knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. The rain intensified, hammering against the diner's windows as if demanding entry. Amelia's fingers tightened around the mug, her breath shallow. The scene outside seemed surreal, like a fragment of a dream she couldn't quite grasp. Elijah, the man she'd passed countless times on her way to work, stood frozen under the awning, his soaked blanket clinging to him like a second skin. Musk's question reverberated in her mind, louder than the storm. $1 billion. The sheer weight of the words was staggering. What would anyone do with such a sum, let alone someone who had nothing? Elijah's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. His throat worked as if he were swallowing stones. Finally, his voice emerged, hoarse and raw. "Change the world?" He laughed bitterly, the sound swallowed by the rain. "I'd start by surviving it." His eyes, shadowed by years of hardship, flickered with something unreadable, hope, fear, or perhaps both. "But if you really want to know, I'd build something for people like me. A place where no one has to sleep on the streets. Where kids don't go to bed hungry. Where..." Inside, Amelia felt her chest tighten. Elijah's words struck a chord she hadn't expected. She thought of her own son, curled up in their drafty apartment, dreaming of a life she could barely provide. She thought of the nights she'd worked late shifts, praying the babysitter wouldn't quit because she couldn't afford to pay her on time. She thought of the countless faces she passed every day, each carrying their own silent battles. The world Elijah spoke of felt like a distant, impossible dream, yet something about his conviction made her want to believe. Musk tilted his head, studying Elijah as though he were an equation to be solved. And how would you do it? It was clinical, detached, as if you were testing a hypothesis. What's your plan? Elijah hesitated, his fingers clutching the edges of the blanket. I don't have a plan, he admitted, his voice soft but steady. But I've got ideas. And I've got people who'd fight for something better if they just had the chance. You don't need $1 billion to know what's broken. You just need someone willing to listen. Amelia's heart thudded in her chest. Without thinking, she stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Heads turned, but she didn't care. She pushed open the diner's door, the bell jangling above her, and stepped into the rain. The cold drops stung her skin, but she barely noticed. He's right, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Both men turned to her, startled. We don't need more money thrown at problems from a distance. We need someone who understands what it's like to live them. Elijah stared at her, his expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. Musk's gaze shifted between them, his face unreadable. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the rain weaving a curtain around them. Then, Musk's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Very interesting. Amelia didn't know what his response meant, but she felt the air shift, as though the universe itself had paused to take notice. This was no longer just a question or an encounter. It was the beginning of something far larger than any of them could comprehend. The ripple had begun, and there was no stopping the wave that would follow. The rain intensified, hammering against the diner's windows with a ferocity that made Amelia flinch. She tightened her grip on the mug, its warmth grounding her as she watched the exchange outside. Elijah's lips moved, forming words she couldn't hear through the glass, but his posture betrayed his unease. Musk leaned in slightly, his phone forgotten in his hand, as though Elijah's response carried the weight of something he wasn't used to encountering, sincerity. Amelia's attention snapped back to the diner as the bell above the door jingled. A man in a weathered leather jacket stepped inside, shaking off the rain. His sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on her. It was Victor, her ex, and the father of her son, Leo. They hadn't spoken in months, not since he'd stormed out, leaving her to pick up the pieces of their fractured life. His sudden appearance now, drenched and disheveled, sent a chill down her spine. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice low but urgent. He slid into the booth across from her without waiting for an invitation. His presence was a storm of its own, unsettling the fragile peace she'd carved out in his absence. Amelia glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking louder than usual. What are you doing here, Victor? It's late. Something's happening, he said, leaning in. Something big. I've got a feeling, Amelia. And I think you're in the middle of it, whether you know it or not. Her brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Before he could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Elijah was on his feet, his blanket slipping from his shoulders as he gestured animatedly at Musk. The billionaire's expression remained calm, but there was a spark of interest in his eyes, as if he'd found something unexpected in the homeless man's words. A small crowd had begun to gather, their curiosity piqued by the strange pairing. Victor followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. That's what I mean. People like Musk don't just show up in places like this without a reason. And if he's talking to someone like Elijah, he trailed off, shaking his head. It's not random. None of this is. Amelia felt a knot form in her stomach. She didn't trust Victor, he'd lied too many times before, but there was something in his tone that made her pause. Outside, Musk extended a hand to Elijah, who hesitated before taking it. The crowd murmured, their faces a mix of awe and skepticism. Victor leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You need to be careful. There are people watching. People who don't want things to change. Amelia's heart raced. What does that have to do with me? You're more connected to this than you think, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. And if you don't figure out how, it might be too late. The bell jingled again, and a woman in a trench coat entered, her face obscured by the brim of her hat. She scanned the room briefly before heading to the counter, but not before her gaze lingered on Amelia for a fraction too long. Amelia's pulse quickened. The pieces of a puzzle she didn't understand were shifting around her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing in her own life. The rain intensified, hammering against the diner's windows as Amelia's fingers tightened around the mug. Her breath hitched as she watched the exchange outside, the surreal image of Elon Musk standing before Elijah like something out of a fever dream. She couldn't hear their words, but the tension in their body language was unmistakable. Elijah's shoulders, perpetually hunched from years of being ignored, now seemed to tremble under the weight of the moment. Amelia felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name, hope, perhaps, or fear that this was just another cruel trick of the universe. Behind the counter, the diner's cook, a grizzled man named Joe, flipped a burger with practiced indifference. You seeing this? Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Joe glanced up, his eyes flicking to the scene outside before returning to the sizzling griddle. Rich guys like him don't stop for people like us, he muttered. Whatever he's selling, it ain't for free. Amelia frowned but said nothing. Joe's cynicism was earned, but something about the way Musk stood there, still, almost reverent, made her think this wasn't just another empty gesture. Outside, Elijah finally spoke, his voice cracking under the strain of disbelief. $1 billion? I'd build homes. For people like me. People who don't have anywhere to go when it rains. Musk tilted his head, his expression inscrutable. Homes, he echoed, as though tasting the simplicity of the idea. And what would you do to keep them standing? To make sure they last? Elijah hesitated, his fingers tightening around the edges of his soaked blanket. The question wasn't condescending, it was probing, challenging, as though Musk were genuinely curious about the answer. Amelia's heart raced as she watched Elijah struggle to respond. She wanted to leap to her feet, to run outside and tell him what to say. She'd spent countless nights dreaming of solutions herself, community centers, job programs, childcare for single mothers like her. But she stayed rooted to her seat, her mind spinning. Why him? Why now? And why did it feel like this moment was bigger than the two men standing in the rain? The diner door creaked open, and a gust of cold air swept in, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt. A young woman in a soaked hoodie stumbled inside, her eyes darting nervously. Amelia recognized her, Jenna, one of the teenagers who sometimes hung around the block, always looking for trouble or escape. Jenna's face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled piece of paper. Amelia, she whispered, her voice urgent. I need your help. It's my brother. He's in trouble. Big trouble. Amelia's stomach dropped. She glanced back at the scene outside, where Musk and Elijah still stood locked in conversation. The threads of her life, her struggles, her responsibilities, her unspoken dreams, suddenly felt like they were tightening, pulling her towards something inevitable. She looked at Jenna, then back at the window. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It was about all of them. The rain continued to fall, relentless, as the diner seemed to hold its breath. The rain intensified, drumming against the pavement as if urging the world to pay attention. Elijah blinked, his breath visible in the cold air. Musk's question lingered, a spark igniting something long buried beneath years of hardship. Slowly, Elijah straightened, his voice trembling but resolute. I'd start with the people like me, he said, his words deliberate. The ones who've been forgotten. I'd build shelters that are more than just walls, places where people can rebuild their lives, not just survive. His eyes locked with Musk's, a flicker of defiance cutting through the vulnerability. But it's not just about money. It's about showing people they matter. Inside the diner, Amelia leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She felt an inexplicable pull, as though the moment outside resonated with her own struggles. Her mind raced with memories of eviction notices, empty refrigerators, and sleepless nights spent worrying about her daughter's future. She couldn't sit idly by. Tossing a few crumpled bills onto the counter, she grabbed her coat and stepped into the storm, the cold rain soaking through her clothes instantly. "Wait." Both men turned to her, Musk's expression curious, Elijah's wary. Amelia's heart pounded as she approached. "If you're serious about this," she said, looking directly at Musk, "then it can't just be a hypothetical question. You have the power to make this real. Don't just test him. Help him. Help us." Her voice cracked, but she stood firm, her gaze unwavering. "You want to change the world? Start here." Musk studied her, his sharp features unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "All right," he said, his tone measured but sincere. "Let's make it real." He turned to Elijah. "You'll need a team. A plan. Resources. I'll give you the funding, but the vision has to come from you." He glanced at Amelia. "And you. You seem to understand what's at stake. Are you willing to help?" Amelia hesitated, the weight of the offer pressing down on her. She thought of her daughter, the endless grind of her jobs, the fear of failure. But then she thought of the possibilities, of what it would mean to be part of something bigger than herself, to create a future where people like her and Elijah weren't invisible. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'm in." The three stood there, rain streaming down their faces, bound by an unspoken understanding. It was a beginning, messy and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. Over the next weeks, the diner became their makeshift headquarters. Elijah's ideas, born from years of living on the margins, took shape. Amelia's practicality and determination grounded the project, while Musk's resources turned dreams into actionable plans. Together, they envisioned a network of community hubs, centers for housing, education, and job training, designed to uplift those most in need. Months later, the first center opened its doors, its neon sign glowing brightly against the night. Amelia stood beside Elijah at the ribbon cutting, her daughter clutching her hand. The crowd cheered, but it wasn't just for the building, it was for the hope it represented. As the rain began to fall again, Amelia looked up, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, she felt seen. "Now," she said, turning to Elijah, "let's keep going." The rain had stopped by the time Elijah finally spoke, his voice trembling but resolute. "$1 billion wouldn't just change the world, it would give people like me a chance to be seen, to matter." His words carried the weight of years spent on the margins, overlooked and discarded. Musk's expression remained inscrutable, but something flickered in his eyes, a recognition perhaps, or a challenge. Without another word, he handed Elijah a business card, the embossed letters gleaming under the dim street light. "Come find me when you're ready," Musk said before slipping back into his car, leaving behind a swirl of rain and exhaust. Inside the diner, Amelia's hands shook as she set down her mug. She had witnessed countless moments of indifference on this street corner, but this felt different. She couldn't shake the sense that she had been a witness to the beginning of something monumental. Her own struggles felt momentarily lighter, as if Elijah's potential transformation carried a promise for everyone fighting invisible battles. She glanced at her reflection in the diner's window, her tired eyes meeting her own. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder, what would I do if I had that chance? Days turned into weeks, and the story of Elijah and Musk spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with speculation, debates, and criticism. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt, while others saw it as a genuine attempt to disrupt the cycle of poverty. Elijah, however, remained silent. He spent his days at the library, poring over books on economics, urban planning, and social reform. Amelia often saw him through the diner's window, his posture straighter, his eyes sharper. She began to feel a quiet kinship with him, their lives intertwined by that rainy night. When Elijah finally reappeared on Musk's radar, it wasn't with a plea for personal salvation but with a plan. He proposed a network of community hubs, safe spaces offering shelter, education, and job training, run by those who had once been homeless themselves. "Empower the invisible," he said during their meeting, his voice steady and clear. Musk listened, nodding occasionally, before agreeing to fund the initiative. The first hub opened 6 months later, not far from the diner. It was named Ripple, a tribute to the moment that had set everything into motion. Amelia, now a volunteer at Ripple, found herself drawn into a new purpose. She taught evening classes on budgeting and job applications, her own struggles lending authenticity to her lessons. Watching Elijah speak to a crowd at the hub's grand opening, she felt a swell of pride, not just for him, but for herself and everyone who had chosen to believe in the possibility of change. The neon "Open 24 hours" sign still glowed outside the diner, but it no longer felt like a beacon of endless toil. It was a reminder that even in the darkest hours, light could seep through. As the years passed, Ripple expanded to cities across the country, its impact undeniable. Elijah became a reluctant icon, his face gracing magazine covers and his words inspiring a generation. Yet, he never forgot the rain-soaked streets where it all began. On the anniversary of Ripple's founding, he returned to the diner, sharing a quiet cup of coffee with Amelia. They sat in silence, the weight of their journey unspoken but deeply felt. The world hadn't been fixed overnight, but it had shifted. And as the rain began to fall once more, Amelia and Elijah knew that the ripples they had created would continue to spread. The question now was simple: who would be brave enough to make the next wave?